The dust of the Colorado Territory swirled across the parched main street of Silverton as Abigail Calloway clutched her reticule tightly against her chest. The year was 1876, and like the nation celebrating its centennial back east, Abigail was embarking on her own new beginning, though not quite the one she had envisioned when she'd left Boston 3 weeks prior. "Miss Calloway," a weathered voice called out from the general store's porch. "Your order's ready, whenever you'd like to collect it." Abigail adjusted her bonnet against the glaring western sun and offered a polite smile. "Thank you, Mr. Gunderson. I'll be right over." 2 months ago, she had been preparing for a comfortable teaching position at a ladies' academy in Chicago. Now, at 24 years of age, she found herself in this rough-hewn mining town, having accepted a last-minute post as the new schoolteacher after her intended position fell through. The journey west had drained nearly all her savings, leaving her little choice but to accept the first opportunity that arose. As she crossed the rutted street, avoiding a passing wagon, Abigail noticed 3 men lounging outside the Silver Dollar Saloon, their eyes tracking her movements. She quickened her pace. Though she'd been in Silverton only 2 weeks, she'd already learned which establishments and individuals to avoid. Inside the general store, the familiar scents of coffee, leather, and tobacco offered a momentary comfort. "Here you are, Miss Calloway," Mr. Gunderson said, placing a bundle of items on the counter. "Chalk, paper, and those primers you ordered from Denver. Came in on yesterday's stage." "That's wonderful news," Abigail said, reaching for her coin purse. "The children will be delighted to have proper learning materials at last." As she counted out the coins, the store's bell jangled, announcing new customers. Abigail didn't need to turn to recognize the deliberate heavy footfalls and smell of whiskey at this early hour. "Well, if it ain't our pretty new school marm," drawled a voice that sent a chill down her spine. "Mighty fine day, ain't it, Miss Calloway?" Abigail acknowledged the man with the barest of nods. "Mr. Harlan." Wade Harlan and his 2 companions had made it their mission to make her uncomfortable since her arrival. The burly man moved closer, forcing Abigail to step back. "A lady like you shouldn't be carrying all these packages alone," Harlan said, reaching for her newly purchased supplies. "Let me help you back to that little schoolhouse." "That's very kind, but I'm quite capable," Abigail replied firmly, gathering her items. "Good day, gentlemen. Mr. Gunderson." Outside, the sun felt even hotter than before. Abigail walked briskly toward the small one-room schoolhouse at the edge of town, aware of footsteps following her at a distance. "Miss Calloway," a new voice called out, and Abigail turned to see a young woman hurrying toward her. "Mrs. Walker, good morning," Abigail greeted with genuine warmth. Sarah Walker was the wife of the local blacksmith and one of the few women in town who had shown Abigail kindness. "I was hoping to catch you," Sarah said, falling into step beside her. "My husband and I would like to invite you to supper this evening. It must get lonely in that little room behind the schoolhouse." "That's very thoughtful," Abigail said gratefully, noting that Harlan and his men had slowed their pursuit. "I would be delighted." "Wonderful. James is smoking a ham today as specialty. Come by around 6. After accepting the invitation, Abigail continued to the schoolhouse with a lighter step. The simple clapboard building had become both workplace and home, with a small living space attached to the rear. It wasn't much, but it was hers at least for the school year. Inside, she arranged the new supplies on her desk, excitement building at the thought of Monday's lessons. The 12 students under her care ranged from 5 to 15 years of age, a challenging mix that kept her busy from sunrise to sunset. As Abigail worked, the distant sound of hoofbeats drew her to the window. A rider approached from the south, a tall figure silhouetted against the afternoon sun. The stranger rode with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to long days in the saddle. As he passed the schoolhouse, he tipped his hat, a brief, polite gesture that Abigail returned with a slight nod before stepping back from view. Later that afternoon, Abigail made her way to the Walkers' home, looking forward to an evening of pleasant conversation. The modest house stood behind the blacksmith shop, smoke rising from both the chimney and the large smokehouse situated at the edge of their property. "Abigail, come in," Sarah greeted warmly. "James is just finishing up in the smokehouse. He'll be along shortly." Inside, the Walker home was simple but comfortable, with handcrafted furniture and cheerful curtains that Abigail suspected were Sarah's handiwork. The aroma of fresh bread and stewed apples filled the air. "It smells wonderful," Abigail said, removing her shawl. "Can I help with anything?" "You can tell me how you're settling in," Sarah replied, gesturing for her to sit. "Any more trouble from Harlan and his bunch?" Abigail sighed. "Nothing I can't handle. They seem intent on making me uncomfortable, but they have done nothing truly threatening." "Yet," Sarah said grimly. "Those men have brought nothing but trouble since they arrived 6 months ago. James says they don't actually work at the mine like they claim." Before Abigail could respond, the door opened and James Walker entered, bringing with him the rich scent of smoked meat. "Miss Calloway, good to see you," he said, hanging up his hat. "I hope you're hungry. That ham's been smoking all day." Dinner was a pleasant affair, with conversation flowing easily among the three of them. James shared news from the mining operations, while Sarah spoke of plans for the upcoming harvest festival. For the first time since arriving in Silverton, Abigail felt truly relaxed. "Have you met many of the ranchers yet?" Sarah asked as they enjoyed slices of apple pie. "Most only come to town once a month for supplies." "Not yet," Abigail admitted, "though I have a few of their children in my class." "The MacMillan ranch is the largest in these parts," James said. "Xavier MacMillan runs it now, after his father passed last winter. Good man, fair in his dealings." "Xavier MacMillan," Sarah added with a meaningful glance at Abigail. "Unmarried, educated back east, and according to Mrs. Gunderson, quite handsome." "Sarah," James chided gently, though his eyes twinkled, "don't go playing matchmaker." "I'm merely providing our new friend with information about the community," Sarah replied innocently. "Besides, Xavier will be in town tomorrow. Apparently he's bringing some cattle to market." As darkness fell, Abigail thanked her hosts and prepared to leave. James insisted on walking her back to the schoolhouse despite her protests. "These streets aren't safe after dark, especially for a lady alone," he said firmly. Back in her small living quarters, Abigail prepared for bed, reflecting on the pleasant evening. The Walker family's kindness had lifted her spirits, making Silverton feel a little more like home. Before blowing out her lamp, she reviewed her lesson plans for the following week, eventually drifting into a peaceful sleep. The sound of breaking glass shattered that peace hours later. Abigail bolted upright in her bed, heart pounding as heavy footsteps moved through the schoolroom. She reached for the small derringer her father had insisted she bring west, her fingers trembling as she loaded it according to his instructions. "Check the back room," a familiar voice commanded Wade Harlan. "She must have it somewhere." "What are we looking for again?" asked another voice. "The woman keeps the town's school money," Harlan replied impatiently. "Monthly fees, building fund, all of it. Has to be a lockbox or something similar." Abigail's mind raced. They were looking for the school's funds, which she had deposited at the assayer's office just yesterday, a fact they clearly didn't know. The door to her room rattled as someone tested the lock. With few options, Abigail slipped out of bed and toward the window. It was small, but she was slender. As she worked the latch, the bedroom door splintered open. "Well, look what we found," Harlan drawled, his massive frame filling the doorway. "Good evening, schoolmarm." Abigail raised the derringer, her hands shaking. "Get out, Mr. Harlan. I've already deposited the school money." Harlan laughed, the sound chilling in the darkness. "Is that so? Well, that's mighty disappointing." He stepped forward, seemingly unconcerned by the small weapon. "But maybe we can find some other form of payment." In one swift movement, he knocked the gun from her hand. Abigail screamed, but a rough palm clamped over her mouth. Now, Harlan whispered. "We don't want to wake the whole town." The next few minutes passed in a terrifying blur as Abigail fought against her captors. Despite her struggles, they bound her wrists and wrapped a cloth around her mouth. Then, with alarming efficiency, they carried her out into the night. "What about the schoolhouse?" one of the men asked. We tore it apart pretty good. Leave it, Harlan ordered. By the time anyone figures out she's missing, we'll be long gone. The stagecoach gold shipment arrives tomorrow, remember? That's the real prize. They carried Abigail across town, staying in the shadows. Her mind raced with panic and confusion. Why were they taking her? Where were they going? The answer came when they reached the Walker property. To Abigail's horror, they headed straight for the Smokehouse. Perfect place to keep her quiet for a day or two, Harlan explained to his companions. Nobody comes out here at night and it'll mask any noise she makes. Inside the sturdy wooden structure, hams and sides of beef hung from the rafters. The air was thick with smoke and salt. Harlan pushed Abigail onto a rough bench in the corner. "Comfortable enough for a Boston lady?" he mocked, striking a match to light a small lantern. "Don't worry, you won't be here long. After we hit the stagecoach tomorrow, we'll be headed to Mexico. Might even take you along if you behave." Despite her gag, Abigail made a sound of outrage, earning a dark laugh from Harlan. "Rest up, schoolmarm," he said, moving toward the door. "Big day tomorrow." With that, the three men left, securing the heavy iron latch from the outside. Abigail immediately began working at her bindings, but they had tied them well. The smoke in the enclosed space was becoming increasingly difficult to breathe through the cloth gag, and panic threatened to overwhelm her. Hours seemed to pass as Abigail struggled against her bonds. The smokehouse grew warmer as morning approached, the air increasingly thick and choking. Her eyes burned, and her lungs ached. Eventually, exhaustion overcame her, and she slipped into a fitful unconsciousness. A dream-like awareness of commotion outside penetrated Abigail's smoke-induced stupor. Voices, then the sound of a struggle. Something heavy fell against the smokehouse door, followed by a gunshot that echoed sharply through the morning air. Then silence. Abigail strained to hear what was happening, fighting against the dizziness that threatened to pull her back into unconsciousness. The acrid smoke burned her throat, each breath becoming more labored than the last. Suddenly, the sound of splintering wood filled the air as someone attacked the door from outside. With a final powerful blow, the door burst open. A tall figure rushed in, silhouetted against the morning light. Strong hands quickly removed the gag from her mouth. "Come on, breathe," urged a deep voice as the man lifted her from the bench. "That's it, breathe." Fresh air flooded Abigail's lungs as her rescuer carried her into the daylight. Through watering eyes, she glimpsed a strong jaw, intense blue eyes, and the concerned face of a man she'd never met. "You're safe now, miss," he said, setting her gently on the ground as he worked to untie her wrists. "I'm Xavier MacMillan. Can you tell me your name?" "Abigail," she managed between coughs. "Abigail Calloway." "Miss Calloway, the schoolteacher," Xavier said with recognition. "I've heard about you. Can you stand?" With his assistance, Abigail rose shakily to her feet. Beyond the smokehouse, she saw two of Harlan's men lying unconscious on the ground. Of Harlan himself, there was no sign. "Harlan," she gasped. "There was another man." "He ran," Xavier said grimly. "But don't worry, he won't get far." He looked toward the main house where James Walker was emerging with his rifle. "James, Miss Calloway needs help. I'm going after Harlan." "Wait," Abigail said, gripping his arm. "Be careful. They're planning to rob the stagecoach today." Xavier's expression hardened. "Is that so? Well, they picked the wrong town." He helped her toward the house, where Sarah was now standing on the porch in shock. "Mrs. Walker, please take care of Miss Calloway. James, round up Sheriff Davis and a few men. I'll track Harlan." As Sarah rushed to help her inside, Abigail watched Xavier mount his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion that seemed to share its rider's sense of purpose. With a final tip of his hat in her direction, Xavier galloped away, the rising sun glinting off his gun belt. Inside, Sarah quickly prepared a basin of cool water and a cloth to wipe the soot from Abigail's face. "Those monsters," she muttered, examining a bruise forming on Abigail's wrist. "Thank Providence Xavier arrived when he did." "How did he find me?" Abigail asked, her voice still raspy from the smoke. "He was bringing a side of beef for James to smoke. Said he noticed the schoolhouse door was open when he passed by early this morning. When he investigated and found signs of a struggle, he came straight here looking for James." Sarah shook her head. You're lucky he's as observant as he is. Not many would notice a door ajar from the road. As Sarah helped her clean up, Abigail learned more about the man who had rescued her. Xavier MacMillan, 30 years old, had returned from school in Boston 5 years ago to help his ailing father run their ranch. When his father passed, he had taken over completely, expanding their operations and earning a reputation as one of the fairest employers in the territory. He reads books, Sarah said, as if this were a particularly noteworthy trait. Has them shipped all the way from New York. James says his ranch house has more books than the Denver Library. Despite her ordeal, Abigail found herself smiling at this information. That's quite unusual for these parts. He's an unusual man, Sarah replied with a knowing look. And single, as I mentioned last night. Before Abigail could respond to this less than subtle hint, the sound of horses approaching drew their attention. James entered moments later, his expression grave. Sheriff's organized a posse, he reported. They're following Xavier's trail now. How are you feeling, Miss Calloway? Better, thank you, Abigail said, though her throat still burned with each word. Do they think they'll catch Harlan? If anyone can track him, it's Xavier MacMillan, James said confidently. Man can read tracks like most men read newspapers. As the day progressed, Abigail rested in the Walkers' home, her body recovering from the ordeal more quickly than her peace of mind. Every sound made her jump, and the memory of Harlan's threats played repeatedly in her thoughts. It was early evening when horses were heard again. Sarah peered out the window, her expression brightening. It's Xavier, she announced, and the sheriff. Abigail smoothed her borrowed dress, her nightgown having been thoroughly ruined by smoke, and tried to calm her racing heart as footsteps approached the door. Sheriff Davis entered first, removing his hat respectfully. Miss Calloway, glad to see you recovering. I'll need your statement about what happened, but it can wait until tomorrow if you're not feeling up to it. Thank you, Sheriff, Abigail replied. I can speak with you now if you prefer. Actually, I think it might be better to wait, the sheriff said, exchanging glances with Xavier, who had remained near the doorway. MacMillan and the posse tracked Harlan to Cripple Creek. We caught up to him and his gang just as they were preparing to ambush the stagecoach. And? Abigail prompted when he paused. Harlan didn't surrender peacefully, Xavier said quietly, stepping forward. There was a firefight. He won't be troubling anyone again. The news settled over Abigail like a heavy blanket. Though she felt relief that Harlan would never threaten her again, the violence of his end was sobering. His companions? She asked. In custody, the sheriff replied. They'll stand trial in Denver next month. We'll need you to testify, Miss Calloway. After the sheriff departed, an awkward silence fell over the room. James and Sarah exchanged meaningful glances before James suddenly remembered urgent business in his workshop, and Sarah recalled washing that needed to be brought in before dark. Left alone with Xavier, Abigail found herself studying him properly for the first time. Tall and broad-shouldered, he carried himself with quiet confidence. His features were handsome in a rugged way, with the sun-bronzed complexion of a man who worked outdoors. But it was his eyes that captured her attention, clear blue and keenly intelligent. I never properly thanked you, Abigail said finally, breaking the silence. If you hadn't come when you did. Xavier shook his head. No thanks necessary, Miss Calloway. Anyone would have done the same. I don't believe that's true, she replied. Sarah tells me you noticed my schoolhouse door from the road. That's remarkably observant. A slight smile crossed his features. I may have had a particular reason to notice the schoolhouse. At her questioning look, he continued. I've been meaning to come by and introduce myself. Several of my ranch hands have children in your class. Oh, Abigail said, unexpectedly disappointed by this practical explanation. Of course. And, Xavier added, his voice softening, I was curious about the Boston teacher everyone's been talking about. It's not often we get someone with your education in these parts. Before Abigail could respond to this unexpected compliment, Sarah returned, announcing that supper would be ready shortly. She insisted that Xavier stay, and though he initially demurred, he accepted when Abigail added her own invitation. Supper was a more subdued affair than the previous night's meal, but the conversation gradually became more relaxed. Xavier proved to be well-spoken and knowledgeable on a wide range of topics, from cattle breeding to literature. Miss Calloway was a literature teacher in Boston before coming west, Sarah interjected during a discussion of Dickens. "Is that so?" Xavier asked with genuine interest. "What brought you to Silverton, if you don't mind my asking?" Abigail explained about her intended position in Chicago falling through and her financial necessity to accept the first available post. "Their loss is our gain," Xavier said simply. "The children speak highly of you already." As the evening drew to a close, Xavier offered to escort Abigail back to the schoolhouse, but she paled at the thought. "Perhaps it would be better if Miss Calloway stayed here tonight," Sarah suggested, noticing her reaction. "James can check the schoolhouse in the morning to make sure everything is secure." "That's very kind," Abigail said gratefully. "I confess I'm not eager to return just yet." Xavier nodded understandingly. "I'll come by tomorrow to help with any repairs needed. Those men likely made quite a mess." As he prepared to leave, Xavier hesitated at the door. "Miss Calloway, I wonder if you might permit me to call on you properly once you're settled back into your home." The question, asked with such formal courtesy, brought a flush to Abigail's cheeks. "I would like that very much, Mr. MacMillan." His smile, warm and genuine, stayed with her long after he had gone. The following days brought a return to normalcy, though Abigail found herself jumping at unexpected noises and keeping her derringer close at hand. The schoolhouse had indeed been ransacked, but with James and Xavier's help, it was soon restored to order. Xavier proved to be a man of his word, arriving early the day after her rescue with tools and wood for repairs. Several of his ranch hands accompanied him, and within hours the broken door and window were replaced and the scattered furniture righted and repaired. The children returned to school 2 days later, full of questions about the excitement they had missed. Abigail provided a carefully edited version of events, emphasizing the importance of community and how the townsfolk had come together to help capture dangerous criminals. True to his word, Xavier called on her the following Sunday afternoon. Arriving with a small bouquet of wildflowers and a book, a volume of Tennyson's poetry that he thought she might enjoy. The gesture touched Abigail deeply, particularly when she discovered he had marked several passages he thought particularly fine. "I hope I'm not being too forward," Xavier said as they sat on the schoolhouse porch. "It's been some time since I've had someone to discuss literature with." "Not at all," Abigail assured him, running her fingers over the book's leather binding. "It's a thoughtful gift." Their conversation flowed easily, moving from books to music to their respective experiences of Boston. Xavier had attended Harvard, studying agriculture and business to better manage his family's holdings. "My father thought I was wasting my time," he admitted with a rueful smile. "Said anything worth knowing about cattle couldn't be learned from books. He wasn't entirely wrong, but I found my education useful in unexpected ways." "Such as?" Abigail prompted. "Modern breeding techniques, crop rotation, even basic veterinary medicine," Xavier explained. "And," he added with a twinkle in his eye, "the ability to converse with educated schoolteachers from Boston." As he prepared to leave, Xavier asked if he might call on her again the following Sunday. Abigail agreed readily, already looking forward to their next meeting. Over the coming weeks, these Sunday afternoon visits became a cherished ritual. Sometimes they walked through town or along the creek that ran behind the schoolhouse. Other times they simply sat on the porch, discussing books, sharing stories of their pasts, or contemplating their futures. Abigail learned that Xavier had returned west not only because of his father's health, but because he genuinely loved the land and the life it offered. He spoke passionately about his hopes for the ranch, his plans to implement new techniques while honoring the traditions his father had established. "And you?" he asked one crisp autumn afternoon. Do you intend to stay in Silverton once your teaching contract ends in the spring? The question caught Abigail off guard. She had been so focused on adapting to her new life that she hadn't given much thought to what might come next. I haven't decided, she admitted. When I came west, I thought it would be temporary, a year or two at most, before returning east. But now, she gazed at the mountains rising beyond the town, their peaks already dusted with early snow. This place has a way of growing on you. Xavier's smile was warm. It does indeed. As October gave way to November, Xavier invited Abigail to visit his ranch. Sarah Walker agreed to accompany her as a chaperone, ensuring propriety was maintained. The MacMillan Ranch sprawled across several hundred acres of prime grazing land, with mountains forming a dramatic backdrop to the well-maintained buildings. The main house was larger than Abigail had expected, a two-story structure built of solid timber with a wide veranda wrapping around three sides. "My grandfather built the original cabin," Xavier explained as he helped Abigail down from the wagon. "My father added onto it when he married my mother. I've made a few improvements myself over the years." Inside, the house was a pleasing blend of frontier practicality and unexpected refinement. The furniture was solid and well-crafted, with colorful quilts and woven blankets adding warmth. But it was the library that took Abigail's breath away, a room lined with bookshelves from floor to ceiling, filled with volumes on every subject imaginable. "Oh, Xavier," she breathed, running her fingers along the spines. "It's magnificent." "My mother's influence," he said, watching her with pleasure. She was determined that living in the wilderness didn't mean abandoning civilization entirely. Every time my father traveled to Denver, he had to bring back at least one new book. "A wise woman," Abigail said, selecting a volume of Shakespeare's sonnets. "I would have liked to meet her." "She would have liked you very much," Xavier replied softly. The day passed pleasantly, with Xavier showing them around the property, introducing them to his foreman and ranch hands, and finally hosting a dinner that showcased his cook's considerable talents. As they prepared to return to town before nightfall, Xavier drew Abigail aside for a moment of private conversation. "I have to travel to Denver next week," he said. "Business with the cattle buyers and supplies to purchase. I'll be gone for about 10 days. "I'll miss our Sunday visits," Abigail admitted, surprised by how much the thought of his absence affected her. "As will I," Xavier replied, his expression serious. "Abigail, when I return, there's something important I'd like to discuss with you." The formality of his tone made her heart beat faster. "I look forward to it." The days of Xavier's absence dragged by with unexpected slowness. Abigail threw herself into her teaching duties, preparing special lessons for the approaching Christmas season and organizing a small pageant for the children to perform for their parents. Sarah Walker, now Abigail's closest friend, visited often, always eager to discuss Xavier's obvious interest. "He's never shown such attention to any woman before," Sarah insisted as they prepared decorations for the schoolhouse. "Mrs. Gunderson says he turned down at least 3 attempts at matchmaking from Denver families with eligible daughters." "Perhaps he simply wasn't interested in those particular young ladies," Abigail suggested, trying to maintain a practical perspective despite the hope blooming in her heart. "Or perhaps he was waiting for a certain Boston schoolteacher to arrive," Sarah countered with a knowing smile. The day of Xavier's expected return brought an unexpected snowstorm, blanketing Silverton in several inches of snow and making travel treacherous. Abigail tried not to worry as one day stretched into 2, then 3 with no word. On the 4th day, as Abigail was dismissing her students for the afternoon, the schoolhouse door opened to reveal a snow-covered Xavier MacMillan. "Mr. MacMillan," exclaimed young Tommy Jenkins, "did you bring us anything from Denver?" Xavier laughed, brushing snow from his coat. "As a matter of fact, I did." He produced a small bag of peppermint sticks, which he distributed to the delighted children before sending them on their way. When the last child had departed, Xavier turned to Abigail, his expression softening. "I apologize for the delay. The passes were nearly impassable with the snow." I'm just glad you made it safely, Abigail said sincerely. Was your business in Denver successful? Very, Xavier replied, a curious light in his eyes. But that can wait. How have you been? They talked for nearly an hour, Xavier sharing news from Denver while Abigail updated him on town happenings. As twilight approached, he finally broached the subject he had mentioned before his departure. Abigail, he began, his usual confidence seemingly diminished. Over these past months, I've come to admire you greatly. Your courage, your intelligence, your kindness to the children, all have impressed me beyond measure. Abigail's heart raced as he continued. I know you came west with different expectations, and your contract with the school runs only until spring, but I find myself hoping that you might consider making Silverton your permanent home. He drew a deep breath. What I'm trying to say, rather poorly, is that I care for you deeply and would be honored if you would consider a future together. Though she had begun to hope for such a declaration, hearing it spoken aloud left Abigail momentarily speechless. I don't expect an immediate answer, Xavier continued hastily. I understand this is sudden, and you may need time. Yes, Abigail interrupted, finding her voice at last. Xavier blinked. Yes, you need time? No, she said, smiling at his confusion. Yes, I care for you too. Yes, I would like to consider a future together. The joy that spread across Xavier's face was worth any uncertainty the future might hold. He took her hands in his touch gentle yet secure. I had hoped, he admitted, but I didn't dare presume. Nor did I, Abigail confessed. When I came to Silverton, the last thing I expected was to find someone like you. As the snow fell gently outside the schoolhouse windows, Xavier drew her closer. May I? He asked softly. At her nod, he lowered his head and kissed her a kiss that held both tenderness and promise. The weeks that followed were filled with a happiness Abigail had never known. Xavier called on her regularly, their relationship now openly acknowledged by the townspeople. Sarah was particularly delighted, claiming credit for her matchmaking efforts, while James simply nodded approvingly whenever Xavier visited their home. Christmas brought a special joy as the school pageant was deemed a success, and Xavier surprised Abigail with a delicate silver pendant, a small book that opened to reveal a miniature portrait of himself. So you'll have something to remember me by when I'm at the ranch, he explained as he fastened it around her neck. As if I could forget, she replied, touching the pendant tenderly. By February, their courtship had progressed to the point where Xavier formally asked Abigail to marry him. The proposal came during a sleigh ride across his snow-covered ranch, the mountains glowing pink in the setting sun. I know it's only been a few months, he said, producing a ring, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. But I've never been more certain of anything. Abigail Calloway, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Tears of happiness filled Abigail's eyes as she accepted both the proposal and the ring. Nothing would make me happier. They set the wedding date for June, after the school term ended and before the busiest part of the ranching season began. The entire town seemed invested in the coming nuptials, with women offering to help with the dress and decorations, while men discussed the proper wedding gift for the couple. Spring brought new challenges as Abigail prepared both for the end of the school year and the beginning of her life as Mrs. Xavier MacMillan. There were moments of doubt not about her feelings for Xavier, but about her ability to be a rancher's wife. Her education had prepared her for teaching, not managing a household staff or entertaining cattle buyers. You'll learn, Sarah assured her during one moment of panic. Besides, Xavier doesn't expect you to transform overnight. He loves you for who you are. This was proven true when Xavier suggested that Abigail might continue teaching even after their marriage, perhaps tutoring the children of his ranch hands or establishing a small school on the property. I know how much teaching means to you, he said. I would never ask you to give up something that brings you such fulfillment. His understanding deepened Abigail's love for him, confirming that she had found a true partner. As June approached, preparations for the wedding intensified. Abigail wrote to her family in Boston, who expressed surprise but ultimately gave their blessing. Xavier's aunt, his only living relative, traveled from San Francisco for the occasion, bringing with her fabrics and laces for Abigail's wedding dress. The night before the wedding, Abigail stayed with Sarah and James. As tradition dictated, the bride and groom should not see each other. As she prepared for bed, Sarah presented her with a small package. "From Xavier," she explained. "He asked me to give it to you tonight." Inside was a journal bound in soft leather, its pages blank except for an inscription on the first page. "For Abigail, that you might record our adventures together. All my love, Xavier." The thoughtfulness of the gift brought tears to Abigail's eyes. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, with wildflowers blooming across the meadows and a gentle breeze tempering the June heat. The ceremony was held on the grounds of Xavier's ranch, under an arch of roses and mountain laurel constructed by James Walker and decorated by the women of Silverton. Abigail wore a gown of ivory silk, simple yet elegant, with Sarah's lace veil crowning her upswept hair. As she walked toward Xavier, who waited beneath the flower arch with the minister, she felt a certainty that had eluded her throughout her life until now. The vows were traditional, spoken with clear voices that carried across the assembled guests. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier's kiss was both tender and passionate, prompting cheers and a few good-natured whistles from the crowd. The celebration continued well into the evening, with dancing on a wooden platform constructed for the occasion and enough food to feed twice the number of guests. As twilight descended, Xavier led Abigail away from the festivities toward a secluded garden behind the house. "Happy, Mrs. MacMillan?" he asked, drawing her close. "Completely," Abigail replied, resting her head against his chest, "though I still can't quite believe that this is my life now." "Believe it," Xavier said softly. "This is only the beginning." Their honeymoon was a 2-week journey to San Francisco, where they stayed in a luxurious hotel overlooking the bay. For Abigail, who had never seen the Pacific Ocean, the trip was a series of wonders, from the bustling city streets to the majestic redwood forests they visited on their return journey. Life as a rancher's wife proved both more challenging and more rewarding than Abigail had anticipated. The days were long, filled with responsibilities that ranged from overseeing the household staff to assisting with ranch business. But there were quieter moments, too. Evenings spent in their library, mornings waking to the sun streaming through their bedroom windows, and the constant, reassuring presence of Xavier's love. By Christmas, Abigail had news that brought Xavier to his knees with joy. They were expecting their first child. The pregnancy, while difficult at times, strengthened their bond as Xavier proved to be an attentive and concerned husband. On a warm August evening the following year, Abigail gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth Sarah MacMillan. Xavier's pride was boundless, his devotion to both mother and child evident in every action. As autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Abigail sat on their veranda, Elizabeth sleeping peacefully in her arms. Xavier joined her, bringing a warm shawl to wrap around her shoulders. "Any regrets?" he asked, settling beside her. "About staying in Silverton, I mean." Abigail considered the question seriously. "None," she said finally. "Though if you had asked me 2 years ago if I could imagine myself here, I would have laughed at the idea." "Funny how life works out," Xavier mused, gently stroking Elizabeth's tiny hand. "If Harlan and his men hadn't locked you in that smokehouse, you would have found another excuse to rescue me," Abigail finished with a smile. "I believe that with all my heart." Xavier laughed softly. "Perhaps, but I'm grateful for how things unfolded, terrible as that day was." Abigail leaned against him, content in a way she had never imagined possible. "As am I." As the years passed, the MacMillan family grew to include a son, James Xavier, born 2 years after Elizabeth, and later a second daughter they named Catherine. The ranch prospered under Xavier's progressive management, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Abigail never returned to formal teaching, but she did establish a small school for the children of the ranch workers, dedicating 2 days each week to their education. She also became an advocate for women's education throughout the region, eventually helping to establish a proper academy in Silverton. The memory of that terrifying day in the smokehouse faded but never disappeared entirely. Occasionally, Abigail would wake from a nightmare, the acrid smell of smoke seeming to fill her lungs once more. But Xavier was always there, his strong arms and gentle voice banishing the fear. "Breathe," he would whisper, just as he had that first day. "You're safe, I'm here." And she was safe, secure in the life they had built together, a life richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined when she first stepped off the stagecoach in Silverton. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Xavier surprised Abigail with a special gift, a small silver key. "What's this?" she asked, turning it over in her hand. "The key to our future," he replied mysteriously, leading her to the library. Inside, he showed her detailed plans for a school building to be constructed in town, complete with living quarters for a proper headmaster and additional teachers. "The Abigail MacMillan Academy for Girls," he announced proudly. "The town council approved it last week. Construction begins in the spring." Overwhelmed, Abigail could only embrace him, her heart too full for words. Later that evening, as they sat on their veranda watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Abigail reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Do you remember what you said to me that day in the smokehouse?" she asked softly. Xavier nodded, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "I told you to breathe." "Those words saved me in more ways than one," Abigail said. "They gave me the courage to take a breath and begin a new life, this wonderful life with you." Xavier turned to face her, his blue eyes still as clear and earnest as they had been all those years ago. "And I meant them just as much then as I do now. Take a breath, Abigail. Our story is still being written." As the stars emerged in the darkening sky, Abigail nestled closer to her husband. Grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together and the love that had transformed a harrowing rescue into the beginning of a beautiful journey. In the distance, their children's laughter echoed from the house, a sweet reminder of the future they continued to build together, a future born from danger and smoke, but flourishing in the clear, bright air of their shared life. And as night fell over the MacMillan ranch, Abigail took a deep breath of the cool mountain air, savoring its sweetness and the profound happiness it represented, a happiness that had begun with a broken door, a strong hand, and the life-giving command to breathe.